Hi everyone, Happy New Year and welcome back to ACC Senior Services. My name is Danny Lee and I am the Lifelong Learning and Wellness Program Manager here. So I just wanted to start off by thanking you for being here again. This is our first special presentation of the year and please look forward to many more. And if you haven't already seen our website, there's an easy way to get a full printout of everything we have to offer. So that's going to be at accsv.org/online. And you can just print the PDF right there at the top of the page. And so our special presenter, first of the year, is going to be Betty Vosters-Kemp. And actually, she is the owner of Avalon Hearing Center. And she has actually been with us for over 10 years coming back, and she's back here with ACC, and she is going to tell us a little bit about her connection with ACC, and we are so happy to have her. So welcome, Betty.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you. Good afternoon or good morning or good day. It depends on when you're watching this video. So what a world we're living in, right? I was a little bit concerned that I would not make it in time to be with you today because my last patient, I was working with her and trying to solve an issue with her hearing aids, and I finally had to say, we're going to have to schedule something in a couple of weeks for you to return because I've got to get to the Asian Community Center. And she said, oh, I know all about them. I have so many friends that go there. And I love the Asian Community Center. I have to say that, I'll say you guys, okay, that you folks are probably the most active, most engaging. I love that you have lifelong learning programs. I love how involved you are in the community and how much you offer for people to keep living fully, because that is so important. As we travel around the sun every year and we get a little bit older, it's very, very important that we remain connected. Very important. The people that are isolating, and it's so easy to be isolating these days living in the pandemic, but people that isolate have a lot of issues. Not only do they get lonely and depressed, but when you get lonely and depressed, it's a cascading effect on your physical health also. So today we're going to spend some time talking about something that happens physically to our bodies often as we age. Doesn't have to, but it happens for a lot of us. And we're going to talk about what we can do to make sure that we stay connected and that we don't have to fall into that cascading effect of things really getting challenging as we grow older in life. So today, this topic is called the consequences of untreated hearing loss. And I want to start with an apology. When I was preparing for this time for us to be together, what came to mind is, what are the true consequences of untreated hearing loss? There's a little bit of fear in that, right? And when I hear people ask me about that, they're afraid. And certainly in this world today, you just need to turn on the television. You just need to open up a magazine. You just need to talk to somebody. And we are living in an incredibly fear-based world at this moment in time, at this moment in history. And I'm very committed that we not hang out in the place of fear today. I have a personal mantra, personal prayer, personal practice that I have, that when I back out of my garage every morning, I ask that power that is greater than me to please help me bring more love and compassion and kindness into the world, and less fear, less anger, less sadness in the world. So today, when I'm talking to you about something that could be very fearful, consequences of untreated hearing loss, we're going to take the fear out of that. And I'd like to talk to you kind of about how I see fear. When I think about fear, it's kind of like for me like mosquitoes. I don't know what your relationship is to mosquitoes, but I'll tell you my relationship to mosquitoes. When there's a mosquito buzzing around me, it freaks me out. I don't like the sound of them. I don't like how it feels when they bite you and suck your blood. I don't like anything about that. And when fear kicks in for me, it feels like one of those nasty little bugs is flying around, and suddenly there are more mosquitoes. And next thing you know, if I keep thinking about what I'm afraid about, or keep thinking about what I'm angry about or concerned about, all of a sudden that one little mosquito has got a whole swarm of mosquitoes all around me, and I'm trying to get rid of all these mosquitoes, all these fears that might be running inside of me. And my hope today is, if you have any fears about hearing, about losing your hearing, about staying connected, that I want to be like a breeze coming through to you. Because when the breeze kicks up, all those mosquitoes go away pretty much. They don't like a breeze. So let's bring a breeze of information and knowledge and compassion and kindness in today as we talk about this very important subject. So again, thank you, ACC, for inviting me to be here, to be part of your lifelong learning programs. It matters. Our hearing matters, you matter, and how you deal with hearing loss also matters incredibly so. So let's talk about our hearing. So we have these great things that hang on the side of our head. They're good for our glasses, they're good for earrings, but basically they're designed to help you hear. Your ears are kind of like this, right? And they collect sound. That sound goes down your ear canal. It hits the eardrum, and the eardrum begins to vibrate back and forth. And that vibrating eardrum then starts to stimulate three little bones. And those three little bones, the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup, they start vibrating. And they cause thousands of little nerve endings deep down inside the inner ear, called the cochlea, to be stimulated. The cochlea is like a membrane with about 25,000 little nerve endings, okay? And that membrane is wrapped up like a big old bale of hay. And the nerve endings that are on the outside of that bale of hay, that cochlea, are the nerve endings that are sensitive to high frequency sounds, like S like Sam, F like Frank, T like Tom. And as we go further into the center of this bale of hay, or into the cochlea, the sounds of the lower pitch sounds, like vowel sounds, A, E, I, are down deep inside in the apex of this cochlea. So that's probably too much information. Bottom line is, remember, sound comes down the ear canal, hits the eardrum, it vibrates, causing three little bones in the middle ear to start vibrating, and they cause thousands of little nerve endings to fire off electrical sounds, auditory sounds, up to the brain, up to the auditory parts of the brain. What you hear in the right ear, most of that sound transfers over to the left hemisphere of the brain and gets processed. What you hear in the left ear, most of that transfers over to the right hemisphere of the brain and gets processed there. I'm saying this because it's very important that you know that we have two ears for a reason. And our brain has two centers, two auditory centers that need to be stimulated. And we need two ears to be able to figure out where is sound coming from. We need two ears, especially when we are in background noise, so that the brain can separate the noise from the conversation that you want to hear. Okay? So the point that I'd like to make here, stress here, is that we hear sound with our ears, but we actually listen and process sound and information in our brain. Okay? So that's an important distinction. Now, as we circle the sun, as we live our full lives, many of us have been exposed to high levels of noise. That noise is not our friend because sound will come in, those loud sounds will come in, vacuum cleaners, blenders, lawnmowers, leaf blowers. Some of you may have worked in factories around noisy equipment. We've all been in a car and somebody's playing their music really loud and it almost hurts our ears, and can't imagine how it is in the guy sitting in the car playing his music so loud. But all those sounds, all those loud sounds come in, they bombard those little nerve endings that I was telling you about, and over time those little nerve endings start to wear out. And when they wear out, they literally bend over and they lay down and they die. And when they lay down and die, it is not like suddenly you cannot hear. It starts to sound like my wife is mumbling, or my daughter or my granddaughter speaks too fast and I can't understand her. So as those nerve endings get bombarded by loud sounds or just the wear and tear of living a full, long life, those nerve endings lay down. And it does sound like people start mumbling because the nerve endings that typically lay down for most of us are the nerve endings that are sensitive to the sounds of S, F, T, TH, and even the K sound. So when those nerve endings start to lay down and die, we still have lots of nerve endings left over, most of us, luckily. But what happens, like I said, everything sounds like you're mumbling. So if I say to you, what do you think I had for breakfast this morning? With a bit of a mild hearing loss, this is how it would sound. What do you think I have for breakfast this morning? And you'll say, pardon me, what did you say? Because I'm mumbling, right? It sounds like I'm mumbling. And what happens? What happens? Answer this question for me. What happens when you say, what? What did you say? I can't hear you. What happens is typically the person who was speaking to you, me, will say it louder. Now, I cannot shout out the letter S. I cannot shout out the letter F or T. Can't shout it. I can shout out ah, O, E, those kinds of sounds, but I can't shout out those high frequency sounds. So now when you say, Betty, what did you say? Can you repeat that, please? Remember, what I said was, what do you think I had for breakfast this morning? Sounds like this. What do you think I had for breakfast this morning? Sorry if I hurt your ears. I didn't mean to. So again, people get really frustrated because they hear, but they can't understand. So can any of you relate to that? Can you relate to that? And again, if you love somebody and they're struggling with their hearing, the best thing you can do is not talk louder necessarily, but talk a little bit slower. Because when we talk slower, we pronounce our words more distinctly. And if there's a little bit of space in between some of those words, then our brains, remember we hear with our ears, but we listen and process with our brains. If we speak a little bit slower, then our brain has a split second to figure out, what did she say? So if I said, hey, I'm going to go on a diet to get thin, you hear, hey, I'm going on a diet to get what? In that little black dress? No, thin, like skinny, right? Thin. So if I say, hey, I'm going on a diet to get thin, your brain is going to have that split second to think, in what? Oh, she said thin because she's going on a diet. So if you really want to help your communication and stay more connected with people who are struggling with hearing loss, whether that's yourself or someone that you care about, speak a little bit slower. That's going to make a world of difference for everybody. Don't speak louder. And here's another reason why I don't want you to speak louder. as you begin to lose those nerve endings, some of them laying down and dying, the ones that are left over become really sensitive to loud sounds, which is like very confusing, right? They get very sensitive to loud sounds. I have normal hearing. I like the volume of life down here. Up here, it's too loud. Often, people with hearing loss need the volume up a little bit, but they can't stand the volume hardly at all. Hardly at all. So their window of comfortable listening gets very narrow. So now they didn't quite understand what I said, and they said, "What? What did you say?" And my natural inclination is to talk louder, right? If I talk louder, what may happen is I may go past what we call your loudness discomfort level. So very important that we know at what point do sounds get too loud? At what point does conversation get too loud? I will tell you, this is a very important part when we're dealing with hearing loss, and I'll talk about it a little bit more later, is that we find out at what point are you sensitive to too much loudness? And it's very confusing because most people with hearing loss will become sensitive to loud sounds, and yet they need life louder to understand it. And again, that phenomena of not liking loud sounds is called recruitment. Recruitment. And it's very real. And I will say about 85% of the people that I personally test suffer from this phenomena called recruitment. They'll come to me, I'll test their hearing, and I will test at what point sounds are going to be too loud, because in this day and age, with the technology that's available, we're able to program hearing aids using computers, and I'm able to make sure that the sounds they need are loud enough, but the sounds they don't like are not too loud. So if somebody does raise their voice, it's not going to go past what I call your loudness discomfort level. So again, this is a very important thing to realize, because a lot of people, because they don't like loudness, they need to turn up the TV a little bit louder, but man, when those commercials come on, it almost hurts their ears. And they think, well, those guys must be just mumbling on TV, or they talk too fast. Sometimes they do talk awfully fast, that's for sure. But those commercials do come on louder. And if they hurt your ears, you can justify it and say, hey, my hearing can't be that bad because I can't stand the loudness of commercials. So if you start noticing that people are mumbling, especially people with softer, high-pitched voices, and that you don't like loud sounds, these are two indications that possibly your hearing is changing and we need to test your hearing. Okay? So I've talked about how we hear. Remember, we hear with our ears, but we listen and process with our brains. I've talked about what happens when we begin to lose our hearing. Most of us will begin to lose our hearing only in the high frequencies, or mainly in the high frequencies. So it's not like somebody just turned the volume down. It sounds like they're mumbling, and that's confusing. And then on top of that, we don't like loud sounds. So because of these things, and because hearing loss comes on so gradually for most of us don't notice that we even have a hearing problem for years. And it takes the average person about 5 full years to actually start being concerned about their hearing and do something about their hearing. Now, in those 5 years, some really sad things start to happen. And I'm going to just talk about some of those things. I have many clients, but I'm going to think about one particular client. And her son is actually my client, has been my client for several years. And he asked me to see his 96-year-old mother. And she's Japanese, and she had hearing aids, but she had become very, very recluse, like a reclusive. She didn't want to go out of her home. Now, granted, we're living in a world of COVID, right? But she used to be an incredibly social person. And he asked me, would you please see my mom and see if there's anything you could do to help her with her hearing? Because she used to be such a social person. She lives in Folsom, and she used to go to the community center there and really be very engaged with people. So when I met this woman, I'm just going to call her Sue to protect, her confidentiality, her privacy. When I met Sue, one of the first things I do is I test to find out how well she was understanding. And when I tested to see how well she was understanding, she was only getting about 60% clarity. And, we talked about that. If you're only getting 60% of what people are saying, it's not going to want you to be out around a whole bunch of people, not even your own family, because you're going to miss almost half of what they're talking about. And that's in a quiet listening environment. Let's say the TV's on, there's 5, 10 of you around the dining room table, people are talking back and forth. Her clarity would have dropped down to maybe 40%. So she really was not part of the conversation. I tested her hearing, put on the headphones, gave her the beeps like we all know. Everybody's probably had one of those tests. But then I took some extra time and I did a lot of speech testing to find out just how much clearer life could be if we were able to stimulate what was left of those nerve endings. Remember, I told you when you lose your hearing, some of them lay down and die? Well, the ones that are left over, if we can stimulate them properly, and stimulate them properly, what I mean is if we get properly fitted hearing instruments to enhance those sounds and bring them back up to the brain where they belong so you can make sense of them, if we can do that, then most people can really benefit from hearing aids. So I tested Sue's hearing, I did some speech testing, I found out she needed the volume a lot louder, but she didn't like it loud. So I had to be real careful. We had to make sure her hearing was going to be in that comfortable listening range, right? Very narrow. And then I found out that if we stimulated her nerve endings, brought the sounds to her brain, we could get her up to 92%. She was living in a world of 60% clarity, and now we could bring her up to 92%. We did impressions of her ears, and I recommended new hearing aids for her, which I did fit to her a couple of months ago. And right out of the gate, she could tell the difference. Right out of the gate, her family could tell the difference. Now I'm going to tell some stories because this is really quite extraordinary. So I saw her son yesterday, and he said, Betty, our whole family went to a baby shower for my niece about 2 months ago. And 2 months ago, I took a video because I was watching my mother. This is a 96-year-old lady. She's in an auditorium where there are probably 50, 60 people all talking. Very challenging, right? And a young man, I believe the father-to-be, came up and he was talking with Sue. And she was asking him questions, he was answering, she was answering back, and her son, unbeknownst to her, was shooting video of this. Sue was so engaged and so interacting with people at this baby shower that her own son, he's an engineer, but he almost got teary-eyed showing me this. He says, Betty, I can't believe how much more she's connected to life because she's hearing better and understanding better. So that's what hearing aids can do when they're properly fit, okay? So what happens when you have hearing aids and they're not giving you the best clarity possible? Or let's say you've never even tried hearing aids, but you've got a hearing loss. So what happens? So you go to a family gathering and everybody's talking and you're trying to follow the conversation and you're working hard to figure it out. I'll tell you, if you're misunderstanding, a good chunk of what they're saying because they're mumbling, right? That's a sign of hearing loss. If they're mumbling and that you have to really pay attention and watch their face, oh man, within 10 minutes, you are going to sit back and just kind of watch everybody. And you do that a few times, you do that for a few months, and next time you're invited to some social gathering, you're going to think twice, do I even want to go? Because it's so hard to follow the conversation. And next thing you know, people are starting to just check out of social gatherings. You know, it's not that much fun being there. Or you might even say, it's not that much fun being at ACC anymore because, you know, when we're playing cards, I can't figure out what people are saying. So if you start noticing that, because you have untreated hearing loss, you want to take notice of that, okay? You want to take notice of that because it's annoying, like all those mosquitoes that I was talking about at the beginning. It's like it's too stressful to be part of a conversation. Now at home, maybe you live with a loved one, maybe you're married, maybe you live with an adult son or daughter, and now you need to turn the TV up a little bit louder, right, to figure out what they're saying. And next thing you know, your loved one, your family member is saying, Mom, do you have to have the TV that loud? Or do you have to have that TV so loud? And so you turn it down a little bit and then you can't understand it. So you turn it back up. Next thing you know, your loved one is leaving the room and they're going to their bedroom or they're going to another place in the house and maybe watching a different television because they can't stand being in the room with that loud television. So again, even in our own home, we start to get more disconnected. We start to isolate from each other because I cannot even begin to tell you how many couples are at odds with one another because the TV's loud and one of them does not like the TV so loud, but the other one has to have it loud. They literally have fights about it, and it causes terrible, sad disconnection in relationships. I often like to think about untreated hearing loss as like the elephant in the room, right? You've heard that saying, there's an elephant in the room and we're like ignoring it. Well, there's an elephant called hearing loss in the relationship, and it's standing in between you and your loved ones. And it doesn't have to be that way. So again, remember, it takes the average person about 5 years to come to terms with, yes, I have a hearing loss and I need to do something about it. So in those 5 years, you get frustrated with loved ones, you disconnect from them, you have fights about it, you start dropping out of social gatherings, maybe you stop going to church, maybe you stop going to meetings that you used to be part of, and you become more and more a homebody. That's not a good thing. That's not a good thing. So what else is happening when we have untreated hearing loss? And this is where, forgive me, it's going to sound very fear-based, and my intention is to bring the breeze in of understanding and shoo away those flies of fear, or not the flies, but the mosquitoes of fear, okay? We don't want you to be afraid. I want you to be informed. You get that? Good. Okay. So hearing is a very important part of our humanness, right? They asked Helen Keller years ago, who was both blind and deaf, if she could have one of her senses restored, which one would she want? So I'm going to ask you the question kind of in a different way. If you lost one of your senses and couldn't have it, would you rather be blind and be able to hear, or would you rather be deaf and be able to see? So think about that. So if you chose, I'd rather be deaf and be able to see, this is how this Zoom class would be going. Okay? If you chose, I'd rather be blind and be able to hear, I'm going to trust you to close your eyes now so that you can't see me, but you're still picking up my voice. So you can open your eyes now. Helen Keller said, oh, I would much rather be able to hear and remain blind because seeing connects me to things in life, but hearing connects me to people, and I feel much more alone, much more misunderstood because I can't understand what people are saying. So again, we often don't think about that, but hearing really, really is the sense that keeps us most connected to other people. So let's talk about how hearing is connected to our physical being and our emotional and mental capacities, we'll say, okay? So any of you that have heart disease, people with cardiovascular problems, high blood pressure, heart disease, you're 4 times as likely to have issues with hearing. Because remember, the hearing system, those little nerve endings that I talked about, there are tiny little blood vessels that supply nutrients to those nerve endings. And if you have cardiovascular problems, you may have issues with your vascular system, and you may not be getting a proper blood supply to your ears, which can cause hearing loss. So for those of you with heart disease, be sure to get your hearing checked because you're 4 times as likely to have issues with hearing loss. If you're diabetic, same thing. We have issues around blood flow, and twice as likely if you're diabetic to have problems with hearing. So that's how our body can affect our hearing. But now I want to talk about how hearing loss can affect other aspects of your being. So balance. Let's talk about balance. The way that we as human beings are able to stay upright and be balanced is in 3 ways. We use our eyes to focus on things. We use our feet. We're grounded in our feet. And we also use the semicircular canals in our hearing system. And what the research has discovered over the last 5 or so years is that people with mild hearing loss are 3 times as likely to have falling episodes. Now, part of that may be because the semicircular canal is it's sharing the same fluid as the cochlea that has all those little nerve endings. So there's a relationship there. But the other thing is if you can't hear the world accurately and distinctly, let's say you have a cat and the cat scoots into the kitchen when you're walking, it can startle you and you're more likely to trip and fall. When we don't have our sense of hearing intact, when we have some hearing loss and it's not being treated, we don't have a good sense of our environment. We have to rely on our feet and our eyes, and we need that third aspect, which is our hearing, to keep us balanced. So again, people with untreated hearing loss, they have an untreated hearing loss and a mild hearing loss. And again, this is what a mild hearing loss sounds like. I'll do that same sentence I used. What do you think I had for breakfast today? Sounds like this. Thank you. What do you think I had for breakfast today? Now that's not a big deal. I mean, you can still hear me. It's just not clear. That's a mild hearing loss. 3 times as likely to fall. As your mild hearing loss gets a little bit more severe to moderate, which would sound more like, you're about 5 times as likely to have falling episodes. And then if you have a severe hearing loss, and severe hearing loss means that you almost don't hear. It's not only that you don't understand, but you don't hear. So it would sound like, okay, 7, 8 times more likely to have falling episodes. So please, again, a big reason you should make sure you're hearing the best you can is so that you stay upright on your feet, because all of us are afraid of falling. And again, forgive me for putting fear into the space. I am going to get the breeze and get it out of there too. Now here's probably the most fearful thing that I'm going to tell you today is people with untreated hearing loss, their cognitive processing abilities, they decline by 30 to 40%. So if you even have a mild to moderate hearing loss, you're using way too much of your brain's resources or energy to try to figure out what people are saying instead of just hearing them and then processing what they're saying. So a 30 to 40% faster decline in your cognitive ability. Untreated hearing loss, mild. Remember I told you mild is just, what do you think I have for breakfast today, right? You're twice as likely to have issues with dementia. A moderate hearing loss, what do you think I have for breakfast today? 3 times as likely to have dementia. And a severe hearing loss, 5 times as likely to fall prey to dementia. So again, one of the mosquitoes in my life is definitely, I want to keep my brain active and alert. And the easiest and the best way to do that is to make sure you're hearing the best you can, okay? So, enough of that. Here's the breeze coming in. Let's get rid of that fear, okay? So the most important thing to do is go and have your hearing tested. At Avalon, we do this testing as a community service, and there have been lots of people over the last 10 years. I usually get to come and hang out at ACC at least once a year, and we do testing sometimes on site. Often people will come to a class that we're having on Zoom today, but they will come in and have their hearing checked, and we do that as a community service, so it doesn't matter what your insurance is, okay? And find out where you're at. And if you have a hearing loss, here's the good news, okay? Here's the put more love, less fear into the world. Here's the good news. We're going to educate you on what's going on with your hearing. We're going to ask you to bring family member in because a hearing problem is a family problem. And we're going to educate you, and we're going to show you and let you put on a set of hearing aids so you can hear for yourself how much better it could be. If you only have a very mild, borderline mild hearing loss, we're going to tell you, not time for hearing aids yet. But if you definitely have a hearing problem and hearing aids could make it life clearer for you, we're also going to give you some options around that. So we're getting close to our time ending, and I just want to talk a little bit about sort of kind of a summary, okay? So please don't stay in denial if you have a hearing problem. Don't fight with your loved ones. My hearing's not that bad. Because if you're doing that, there's just more mosquitoes of fear flying around you all the time and around your family. Let's get the breeze. Yeah, come through, shoo those mosquitoes away, and let's have your hearing tested. Get an appointment to have your hearing tested and find out where you're at. Find out how well are you understanding right now, and if you were fitted properly with the right hearing technology for your hearing loss, your lifestyle, how much clearer could the world be for you? That's a really important thing. And then if you do choose to get hearing aids because they help, or maybe you're wearing hearing aids now, let's make sure that they're programmed to best match your hearing loss. A lot of people get hearing aids many different ways, but they'll buy the hearing aids and they think that's the solution. And then 2-3 years go by and suddenly they're at like 60%, like Soothe, who I talked about earlier. So when you do get hearing aids, it's very important that they're serviced and cleaned at least 2-3 times a year. I prefer 3 times a year. And make sure that they're programmed to match your hearing loss. Thank you. So be sure that you start stimulating those nerve endings, and most important of all, properly fitted hearing aids stimulate your brain. And when you keep your brain stimulated, you don't have to worry so much about falling, about dementia, about isolating, about thinking that life is not that easy, because you are going to be more connected. Your loved ones are going to love that you're more connected. So I've given you a ton of information. Are there any questions that you have for me? If you have a question, could you please write it in the chat, and that question will be presented to me, and I will do my best to answer your questions. Oh, okay. And apparently you can also unmute. So if you'd like to unmute and speak, I will hear your question. Okay.
Do you do hearing tests at ACC?
Yes, I can hear you.
Do you give hearing tests at ACC?
Do we give hearing tests at ACC? We have in the past, but right now with the pandemic and with the new variant out, I think ACC is being a lot more cautious, but I know I'm going to work with Danny to see if we could get here sometime and offer some hearing testing. Absolutely. Okay, I hope I answered that question.
Is there a cost for this?
No, there is no cost. And the best case scenario would be to call Avalon and make an appointment, tell them that you heard me speak, and make an appointment at Avalon. We're about, if I'm about a 20-minute drive from ACC. So I believe somebody typed in a question about, do you have any tips about how to prevent hearing aids from falling out when you're wearing and removing a mask? So yes, I do. So I'm assuming that you're wearing the type of hearing aid that fits over your ear. So I'm going to put my mask on. You're going to make sure and see, as soon as I put my mask on, everything's a little bit muffled, right? So that's horrible. Mask makes everything so much harder for everybody, and especially if you even have a mild hearing loss. So what you want to do, you want to have your head first, then your hearing aid, and then you want to put this little string next to your ear, in between the hearing aid and your ear. And when you take the mask off, don't pull it off like that, because your hearing aids are going to go flying. When you take your mask off, you're going to pull it back like this and like that, so that it goes over the hearing aids and doesn't grab them. Okay? I hope that helps. I hope that helps. Yeah. Any other questions? Talking to me or typing to me, please. Okay. So, your hearing
What kind of
aids.
hearing aids?
Go ahead.
What kind of hearing aids do you provide?
What kind of hearing?
Digital?
Oh,
Yes.
absolutely. So the question was, what kind of hearing aids do we provide? Are they digital? Yes. In fact, I think every hearing aid on the planet, pretty much, well, I shouldn't say the planet, but every hearing aid in North America is probably digital technology. And what happens is sounds come into that hearing aid through the little microphones. It gets processed through a computer. Some of the hearing aids I personally fit now have 2 computers built into them. So they're doing all these calculations to try to make conversation clear and turn down the background noise a little bit. That goes through those computers, makes thousands of adjustments in a minute or so, gets amplified, and then that amplifier sends the electrical signal down into a speaker, and that speaker turns the electrical energy back into sound, and all of a sudden, people are speaking a lot more clearly. So we do fit digital hearing aids, and we really do extra testing. One of the tests I hadn't mentioned is we do a speech and noise test, because that's the hardest place for people to understand, whether you have a hearing loss or not, is when there's a lot of background noise. And everybody's brain is different because, again, remember, we listen and process with our brain. Some people, when they're hearing well because they have good hearing aids, have very little trouble in background noise. Other people really struggle. So if your brain has a hard time separating that noise from the conversation that you want to hear, we want to get you more sophisticated technology that will try to turn down that background noise and push the conversation through that background noise. Hearing aids have come a long, long way in the last half year. They've come an incredible distance. They can hook up to smartphones, so when you take a phone call, you put your phone down. I've got my smartphone here. You just put your phone down here, and you talk. And it's like you're sitting in a room with people talking to you right in your ears. And when you're done, you're done. And if you want to listen to music or a podcast or a show, it streams right into your hearing aids. And the more you exercise your hearing, the better that is. So this is the last thing I'll say, and then I believe our time is pretty much up. But when you begin to lose your hearing, Some of those nerve endings are going to lay down and die, can't fix them, but we want to stimulate the nerve endings that are left over. And the way you do that is you get a really good hearing test where they test a lot of things. Are you sensitive to loudness? How does your brain work when there's a lot of background noise? We take all of these things into consideration, recommend hearing aids, and you're fitted with hearing aids. I like to think of hearing aids as exercise machines for those little nerve endings that are left over and for the auditory parts of the brain. And as long as you keep stimulating those nerve endings and the auditory parts of the brain, the better that is. The more you will stay connected to what matters in your life, the more you will stay healthy in your life. And who you work with is very important. So when I work with clients, I always say, I'm going to adopt you because I'm going to make sure that you're hearing the best you can, not just today, but in years to come. So thank you. Thank you for allowing me to talk about something that most people don't want to deal with, hearing loss. Thank you for allowing me to talk about the scary things that happen when you don't treat hearing loss or your hearing loss is undertreated. You have hearing aids, but they're not doing the right job for you. Thank you for letting me talk about that. Thank you for letting the breeze come through to scoot out those mosquitoes of fear, and let's have more love in the world, more kindness, more understanding in the way we think and understanding in the way we hear. So bless you, be well, and yeah, more love, less fear.